Hello again everyone, I'm Minnie Small and today I'm going to be sharing how you can create dynamic sketchbook illustrations with paint and pencil. In this one we'll be stylizing some gouache fish paintings with line work and details in coloured pencil. For this page I am using the Strathmore Mixed Media Sketchbook in 5.5 by 8 inches, Lyra Polycolour pencils, Maimeri Gouache and Princeton brushes. As always, you want to find a blank page in your sketchbook, clip it open if you'd like to keep it flat, and grab just 3 coloured pencils in pink, yellow and grey. You'll also need a limited palette of gouache paints. I find that with white, black, magenta, cyan and yellow, you can mix pretty much any colour that you'd like to make. You'll also want a round brush around a size 6 with a pointed tip, and a fine tipped long round brush in about a size 2, plus some water to mix your paint in and a rag to dry off your brush between colours. And finally you'll need a palette to mix your paint on. So we're going to start by sketching out these fish. They're very simple in shape, so you start with just a long curved line along the top, a slightly angled line coming down to show the mouth, and then another more curved line to show the bottom of the fish. Then we'll close that off on the end and add a tail, one large eye right at the top front, and a couple of lines to show where the gills will be. And then a couple more lines to add a fin and a fin on the top as well. And we'll do the same for the next fish, long line along the top, connected to a more curved line along the bottom, a tail, a nice big eye, some gills, and some fins. And repeat that one last time on the bottom. Now we're going to start laying our paints out on the palette. I like to squeeze out quite a lot of white just because it tends to get muddied the most quickly on your palette, and the more you have on there, the more you have to use. And then just laying the rest of the colours underneath that, and you only need a very small amount for this painting. Starting off by mixing some white with some black. I've got a tiny bit of water on my brush now, and I've made this medium grey that I'm going to use to paint along the top side of the fish, just in one long strip. And don't worry if the edge of this part of the paint is a bit more textured, where your paintbrush might be a bit drier. That actually adds to the impression of scales and adds a little bit of texture. Then add a bit more black to your paintbrush with a tiny bit of blue and paint that along the inside of that area that you just painted. And use that also to shade around the eye, and then go back to that first grey and use that along the edge of what you've just painted to blend it in with the base layer. You can also use that colour to just paint a little bit of shadow along the bottom of the fish, and use that darker colour again to close off the tail of the fish and add a few small little scales here and there. Now with white, I'm just going to blend that area into the bottom of the face and paint the rest of the face white and some of the underside of the fish. That'll just help when we start blending out the rest of the areas that we're going to paint in. And with a darker grey, I'm shading the front of the face and underneath the eye. And now mixing the yellow and the magenta with a little bit of white as well, and using that to add some colour around the gills. Also taking some yellow and adding that around the mouth, and then using white again, as I did earlier, to just blend that all together so that there aren't too many harsh edges. But honestly, this style of painting kind of lends itself to a more painterly look, more sort of blocks of colour that you can then define later on with the pencil. So I mixed some black in with the magenta and yellow mix, and there's a little bit of blue left in there from earlier, and that made the perfect colour for the fins. And still going back in with that white. It's a bit muddied with the yellow now, but that's fine. All of these colours will blend in together, and I'm just using that to finish off the area around the face. Going back and forth with that colour and with the pink colour to add just a sort of area of what looks like blush on this little fish's face. The colour that's left on my brush, and also adding a bit of yellow to add in a few dots here and there of scales, just going in completely at random wherever I feel like I want to add something. And with that magenta mixed with yellow, I've made a rich orange that I'm going to paint the bottom of the eye with, then go in with white on the top of the eye and blend that out so that the top of the eye is lighter than the bottom. If you need to go back and repaint the bottom of the eye in again to make that a bit more colourful, you can do that, and it should blend together quite easily. Taking that same brown colour, which is a mix of the yellow, magenta and a tiny bit of blue, and finishing off with the tail, just loosely painting in the edges of it, and the same with the fin. And then using white to fill in the rest of the tail shape, letting it blend with the brown that I've already put down. One more little fin down at the bottom. And then with that very fine brush, I'm taking some pure white and adding some highlights. So first of all on the eye, and then a few scales here and there again, just a little bit of shine on the surface of the fish. And then some very fine lines in the fin, a highlight on the lip and underneath the eye, and all around the eye and the gills, and some more fine lines along the tail. Now we're doing the exact same thing, again making that medium grey and painting along the top side of that next fish, adding in that darker area and blending that out with the grey again. And as I said earlier, if there's a bit of texture, embrace it, it adds to the texture of the fish. For the bottom edge of the fish this time, I used that muddied white colour that I just had on my palette. It really doesn't matter, they're all within the same family, they're all different shades of grey, so sometimes it's a warmer grey, sometimes it's a cooler grey, and I'm just painting the underside of the fish and adding some darker areas around the gills and the eye and the mouth. Using white, as I did earlier, to blend that so it's less of a harsh line. And then using pink to add a bit more blush to this one as well, a bit more colour. Going back and forth with pink and yellow and white, blending and deepening any areas of shadow as I go. Same orange for the eye here, with the white on top, and a few more areas of pink with some scales dotted through again in pink and yellow. I did the same thing with the tail and the rest of the fins. And then with the final fish, I decided to make it a little bit darker than the previous two. So the medium grey that we started with previously, I've added a little bit more black to, and I'm bringing it further down on the fish and adding a strip of dark blue, so blue with black mixed in along the middle, and then deepening that blue area right in the middle with a strip of black, and going back to the lighter grey to start blending everything out, just swiping over it one time so that it'll blend with the colour underneath. And using that same colour to outline the gills and around the eyes and under the mouth and the underside of the fish as well, and going back in with white and blending that out into the body of the fish. Adding those pink areas now around the gills and around the eye, and a few scales throughout. And same thing again with the yellow, using that to shade under the eye and under the mouth and on the underside of the fish before adding a few dots here and there. Adding in the eye now, that's lighter at the top, and using that brown to paint in the fins and the tail. And using white again to soften those edges. And again with that detail brush, going in to add some light, highlight on the eye and around the eye. A strip of light running through around the middle of the fish. I just thought as this fish was a bit darker, we would be able to see a bit more contrast from this strip of highlight. and a few glints of light coming off different scales and around the gills, underneath the eye, and adding in those highlights on the previous fish as well. And that wraps up the painting portion. So as you can see, it is very loose, it's very painterly, and really if you're just doing a study of the fish, you can leave it at this, but if you want to give them a bit more finish and neaten up those edges, then you can go in with pencil to add a bit more dimension and a bit more style as you go. So we're just going to speed through these first two fish because the process is the same for all of them. I'll talk in more detail when we get to the final fish, but as you can see, I'm outlining the shape and all of the key areas, and then shading periodically where I feel like it needs it, adding shading in pink and yellow as well as the grey. And I also went in with some darker paint just to really make those eyes pop when I add in the pupils, making sure to leave those highlights untouched. Exact same process with the next fish, outlining it, shading it using grey, pink and yellow to shade it, and also using those lines to show the texture of things like the tail, and deepening the colour of the eyes on both of these fish as well. Now that we're down to the last one, you can see in a bit more detail how I'm going about this. So you just want to draw around the eye at first and around the fish's face, giving it a cleaner outline. And shading as you go, shading around the mouth and under the eye and around the back of the gills. Then continue outlining and shading. You can outline the fin here on the body and use some light strokes to indicate the contours and ripples of the fin, and some even lighter strokes underneath and around the fin to add some shadow and really make it pop out. I'm also adding a bit more contour to the shape of the body of the fish with some shading here towards the tail, and drawing in the tail with again those fine lines coming out from where the tail starts and up along the top as well. And the shading is the same with pink and the yellow. You can add more shadows along the underside or along the top of the fish underneath the fin. It's the same places that you would normally put shadow, but they're just a bit more interesting in different colours. So for this one I chose pink and yellow, but really you could use any colour to add some more interesting shadows to your paintings as well. And I really liked how this darker fish looked, so I just wanted to finish off by adding some darker shadows to the other two. With a mix of paint and pencil, you can elevate and add style to what began as simple brush strokes, so I hope that you have enjoyed this time in your sketchbook, and I look forward to seeing you again for another painting. Thanks for watching.